Tonight, once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
Just like every other podcast, everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the Drunk Turkey Show. I'm Daniel, as always. Big Blue's not with us today. I think he'll be back on Friday. And on Friday, we're going to have a special guest. She's already in the live chat. We're going to have a Swamp Bros channel. I'm going to be coming on Friday. We're going to be talking about the Bryan Kohberger case then as well. I want to say thank you and hello to everybody in the live chat and everybody tuning in. And if you're tuning on this in the live on the replay, and for those tuning in on the live chat, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, ring that notification bell, do the whole thing. So with that being said, today we have a special guest, A.R. Hayes, from a YouTube channel called A Convicts Thoughts. How's it going, A.R.? How you doing, my man?
Hey, man, I appreciate you again. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. I know you got a big fan following. I appreciate you allowing me to get in front of some of that myself. So appreciate you very much, my friend.
No problem. No problem. You reached out to me. You wanted to, have a respectful discussion on the case. I've looked a little bit into some of the stuff that you create when it comes to the Bryan Kohberger case, not too much. So for those that aren't aware, can you kind of tell everybody a little bit about what your channel is about?
Yeah, Daniel, I give a little bit of a different perspective because there are so many great content creators out there that speak to the details and look at the guilt or the innocence, and they really want to just dissect the case. And I myself, when I get into the true crime community, coming from the background that I have, I look at the justice system, the process on both sides, whether it be the defendant, the suspect of the case, or even law enforcement. And I try to help people better understand the way that you work through that. And of course, you get into conversation of feelings of whether you feel someone's guilty or innocent. But at this point, as you know, in the Idaho 4 case, there's so much up in arms. I can't tell you if someone's innocent or guilty, but I can give you my feelings of what I'm seeing going on. So I'm trying to help people just understand from that side of things.
So when it comes to the Idaho case, when did you start covering it? Was it something that you started covering when it happened, or did you pick it up sometime later?
You know what? When it first happened, I was just kind of new to everything, even Facebook. So I started a Facebook group, and it was just a respectful group where you could be open-minded and talk about things. I didn't get into YouTube until probably October or November of the last year. So the case had already been about a year old, but I'd been pretty familiar with it, just not on a public spectrum like this talking about it. So rather new. I'm pretty new.
So were you how much how in depth were you when Bryan Kohberger got arrested?
It was pretty deep discussion. I'm sure you even found yourself, deep discussions. Everybody was trying to put together the pieces, and all we literally had what was surrounding the home and the key players that were in public eye. So everybody was doing the Reddit, and everybody was doing all the different things. And I'll tell you what, I had my opinions just like everybody else did. I looked at serial killer avenues and experienced within the crime, and because of my background and the people I've been around, that's the feel that I got. So, it grows on you, as you know, as you get bits and pieces and you learn new things, and you put together the emotional pieces of it as well. Meaning you get to see what the families are going through. You start to put together a bigger picture and the bigger opinion. So I would say I was pretty in depth because you know how people love to talk about this case 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah, I assure you that that's true. It's kind of sometimes it fulfills more time than I care to admit when it comes to how much time and effort that I've put into it. So
Job.
yeah,
It's a full-time job.
so Bryan Kohberger gets arrested, and there's a probable cause affidavit, 19 pages worth. What is your opinion of the probable cause affidavit?
I wish it had been better written. Like maybe just better worded, better put together. Through time, we can dissect that. And there's going to be a fine line where everybody takes a side of that, whether they agree with it or don't agree with it. But a probable cause is a theory-based affidavit to get an arrest. So it's not going to be all the details that back a case. This isn't all the evidence. So I know they only need to put in anything that can get them the arrest, and they stop right there. They don't need to fill in the rest.
I
just
agree.
been better written, maybe a little bit, maybe more experience behind it. I mean, I know you kind of come from that background, and you yourself could maybe get a little bit of a sense that they're not well prepared for a case like this. It may be the biggest they've ever seen.
I mean, right. And yeah, I think the size of the case is obviously probably the largest that they've seen in that area. I do think that FBI had a major role in this case, and so did the Idaho State Police, who aren't as inexperienced. I don't disagree with you within the way that the PCA was written. I would have preferred a little bit more of explanation. However, we also have to take into consideration is who was the intended audience for that PCA. It wasn't for myself, you, or the viewers. It was directed towards the courts and towards a judge to determine whether or not there was probable cause to arrest him. And with that being said, it took me some time to read it, to be honest with you, and to go through it. And I've said this before, a lot of the reasons why I may have misunderstood some things in the PCA early on is because I may have read it too fast. And not only that, but like, as you mentioned, it could have been written a little bit better. I agree. I don't disagree with that. I had many questions early on in it, but for me, as I've read it a few times and kind of understood what they were saying a little bit better, I think it's kind of cleared up a little bit for me.
And I think that's, that you're absolutely right. This is between the judge and the person writing the affidavit to get an arrest warrant. This isn't meant for the overall masses, even though I'm one that speaks. I love transparency, Daniel. I'm really big on transparency. I like to see the system work itself through in a manner that everything is right before all of us and we understand what's flowing. But in cases like this, that's not how it works. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's not how it works. At the end of the day, I know what the affidavit's about. You know what the affidavit's about. And I think the majority do. We just have questions based upon, are we going to see more that fills in the wording of that PCA? And at the end of the day, more evidence to back it. That's really all I want to see the transparency of the evidence coming together like they say it should. That's it.
Right. And I think there's a time and place for that. And I think that place will be in trial. Yeah. I would love to see as much as possible as well. I think that the reason why there's such a gag order, and I've been honest about this, and I've told this to a few people, when it comes to the treatment towards Bryan Kohberger and his defense team, when it comes to certain things that they've allowed in court, certain things that they've allowed them to argue, such as the IGG, which is something that hasn't been argued with any other, crime it's been utilized into convict somebody or to find someone. Those things were all very reminiscent of a court system that appears to me to be playing a little bit scared. When I look at how they are acting, and how some of the things that are happening, and I've explained this to even the families, that I was like, man, this reminds me of like if you had an officer that pulled over another officer, or a lawyer, somebody who may have equal to same knowledge of the law as you do, and they're not too confident in some of the steps that they're saying or taking because of the level of education and intelligence that the defendant has. And so that's what it looks like to me. And it seems like they're kind of maybe getting over that here recently. What did you think about the last hearing?
And that, just real quick, I agree with you. I actually think that because none of them have been involved in something of this nature, and even outside of what's happening in the case itself and the evidence and the courtroom, it's the masses out here like you or I and all of us that are dissecting this case second by second. They've never dealt with that before. They don't know legitimately how to pump the brakes and say, hey, we got to get this in order and we got to get this back, and I understand the gag order. I've never been a fan of them, but I understand them. And this is one of the biggest cases I've ever seen with one of the strictest gag orders you can find. And I always scream and say, this is hurting the case. This is hurting it. But it's legitimately not, because it's allowing them behind the scenes to handle what they need to handle without all the dissecting happening out here. Because, legitimately, either Bryan Kohberger could be fried and guilty no matter what because of public opinion, or everybody's going to say he's innocent because they find issues with the PCA or the law enforcement. So it's a really fine line. Right. And I think the courts are doing all they can to try to meander through that puddle, so.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I agree with that. And what I was saying, and I forgot to finish that. I forgot where I was going almost there. When it comes to the gag order, I think that it has been super strict in efforts to give Bryan Kohberger the fairest hearing possible. And I think he deserves that, as just anybody does. I don't think that it would be fair to him. And as Ann Taylor had mentioned before, that if something were to be said that they wanted to be suppressed and or taken out of trial, and let's just say they're successful in doing that. However, that information is now in the public, just like their survey said that some of that information that gets out there, potential jurors, if they hear that stuff, sometimes they can't indifferent whether they heard that in trial or on the news or in the media or somebody from down street or wherever the case may have been. And so I don't think it'd be the smartest decision in benefit of Bryan Kohberger to make as many things public in that manner. And I think that's the way they're playing it. And I think that the defense is going to utilize that and try to use that to their benefit and say, no, they're hiding things. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, and majority, I agree with you. I trust me, in many of my cases where I was going through the court system, I wished I had a gag order in place to protect me, because some of the things that came out, I'm shaking my head going, God, I wish that had never been said, because nobody will ever forget that, that's got me. And it's maybe not even true, and it's got me now. And it was all because it slipped out before it needed to come out. But, I have a little different view as you, and I'm not trying to disrespect you in your feelings, because I understand where you're coming from. I understand what you're saying. Like, I processed it. I definitely am a critical thinker, and I take everything into account. I listen to it before I jump base and do what I feel. But I have an odd feeling here. And, the last hearing, you asked me how do I really feel about the last hearing, and I've spoken pretty strictly about it. I just feel as though the detective looked clueless on the stand in this last hearing. I feel as though if he had spoken more directly, more powerfully, and said, look, I got the information back. This is what I did with it. Here's what I worked out with it. This is why I did what I did. We're going to leave it at that. But he didn't do that. He sounded shaky. And to me, that's the inexperience. And I believe Ann Taylor's going to utilize that. She's going to come on the attack now, because you and I both know the next things that are coming into play are suppression motions for the evidence. We're going to have suppression coming towards the DNA. We're going to have suppression of statements, probably of hearsay, stuff that's maybe coming from informants. It's all going to depend. Do they have an eyewitness? Do they have a really valid witness they can put in there and is strong in the words? You can't get rid of that, so you can't suppress that. But they're coming for some suppression motions. It'll be interesting to see.
I'm sure they're going to be coming for some, but when it comes to the testimony of the detective, I felt, when I was watching it, was more like he wanted to explain what he was talking about. But when you're in a court setting, you don't have that opportunity to do the things that you're saying. The attorney's going to stop you there and say, this is a yes or no. It is in cross-examination is when those questions get answered. And I thought that during cross-examination in this trial, that his answers made sense. Now, to be honest with you, I think that it was a tactic. I've said this since before. I've said this for a while, that I think that the defense is going to play their tactics, and so is the prosecution. Both sides are going to do it. At the end of the day, the evidence was turned over before September deadline. So Ann Taylor can't use this against anybody. And
I understand that argument, Daniel. I really do. However, there was an argument at the court that had a deadline that has come and passed. Now, I don't know if they've extended that. That might be. They might have extended that, and I just didn't catch drift of that. I just have it in my head that the CAS report, they even got to the point they were writing subpoenas for it. The judge signed those at a just not too long ago hearing. It just seems to me, and this comes from my background, Daniel, this isn't everybody's view. This is just, I have to go with my gut feeling too, just like everybody else, and just say, man, that just felt odd. Like you all of a sudden found it. It came out of nowhere, you got it. And then I go back and read about Stickergate, and it just kind of doesn't feel right. Not saying they're combined. It might not even be the same person, Daniel. It might not be the same person, but it just feels,
Right. No, and I understand that. Oh man, I'm hearing some static. I don't know if you guys are. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I do think this was a tactic, and a tactic that's not going to be seen by the jury. For me, it's not so much whether or not could it have been done, should it have been done, the could have, would have, should have. It's more about what's going to be used in court and what's not going to be used in court. What do they have an argument for, and what don't they have an argument for? The would haves and the could haves, I mean, that's all for make believe and fairy tales. And so, when it comes to this evidence or whatever, unless the detective says, I knew exactly where it was at, there's nothing anybody can do. The extension was done until September on the evidence, and so they turned it in beforehand. And I think they did it on purpose on the timing that they did. I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was done purposefully. It caught Ann Taylor off guard, in my opinion. There were several times where it appeared that she had probably a lot that she wanted to do or say or try to prove that she probably couldn't go to because the evidence was now turned over. But when it comes to the overall impact of the case, it's not going to have any. And I mean, we can argue about whether or not it was right or wrong or indifferent. What difference is it going to make? And that's kind of like with the IGG as well. Like, we can argue back and forth. Hey, was the IGG, the right thing to do or not? Man, are you hearing static on your end?
I don't.
Oh, okay. I must be my headphones. I must have done something with my headphones. It's like capturing in my ears, but all right. But so, yeah. And I know people are saying they just can't do that as a tactic. Well, I mean, the defense is supposed to have turned in the alibi, a long time ago. In fact, it was supposed to have been turned over before, all that other evidence was deemed necessary to be turned over into the discovery. In fact, there's Idaho state law that determines why that is. And that's because they don't want people to fabricate an alibi. Now, I'm for one, all for the defense getting everything they're supposed to get. And I'm also for one that the prosecution's supposed to get the same, and in the order and in the timely fashion that's meant for it to have been done. Wouldn't you agree to that?
Yeah, no, I believe both sides, because being through the court system as the defendant, that's what you want. You want everything out on the table, because then you could defend it, or you could try to disprove it, or, as a defendant, you try to disprove it or defend yourself from it. And as a prosecutor, that's what you utilize to find somebody guilty. But when it comes to the alibi, and this is just my thought process, and I get the Idaho state code and I get everything, but I'm a firm believer. And again, I got to just rely on how I would do it. I would stay completely mute. There would be no alibi defense coming from me. And Ann Taylor specifically, in my opinion, stated she was going to use the state's experts to prove Bryan Kohberger's alibi, meaning I don't expect Bryan Kohberger to testify to an alibi, and I don't expect he's going to call a witness to do so, because that would be breaking the law, right? That's why they have that law in place, for him to have to turn over the alibi. If you don't do it, you can't call expert testimony to that. You're waiving your right to the alibi defense at that point, because the prosecution wouldn't have time to verify. They would be unprotected to try to disprove your alibi. But what Bryan Kohberger can do is sit back quietly, allow the state's experts to put on their case of where they feel Bryan Kohberger was, why they feel he was there, what proof they have, and now you introduce rebuttal witnesses to those experts. So now someone like Cy Ray, who everybody's thinking is this star, he's going to come out of the woodwork and testify for the defense. He could sit back and he could just wait. And if something in the expert testimony from the prosecution falls short, Cy Ray can come in and attack that from the defense as a rebuttal witness. I'm just saying, I wouldn't give an alibi. I wouldn't do it. Now,
no, I know. I mean, if I was Bryan Kohberger, I wouldn't give one either. If I was also if I did the crime that I was alleged to have committed, I wouldn't give one. If I was innocent and I was somewhere else, and I had so many people that were willing to help me or find any shroud of evidence that I was somewhere else, which there's a ton of people that are willing to help them, I would be screaming out to the world like, hey, this is where I was at. Internet sleuths, go find those cameras.
I'm gonna ask this just respectfully. When you say there's many people out there that are willing to help him, are you talking about actual experts and law enforcement?
No. I'm talking about internet sleuths. I'm talking about those
internet sleuths aren't gonna know where he's at. I mean, come on, let's just be real about it. You and I, we can talk until we're green in the ears, and
we don't know where he's at because we don't know where he's at because he didn't say. What I'm saying is, if he was innocent, and you have all these people that have these capabilities of going out there and finding those cameras, or maybe perhaps there's a trail cam out there in that park that he says he was at, something to that nature. Why not get that information out there while that information is possibly still existent, versus waiting and not doing this? Now, I completely understand the tactic, but that tactic that you're referring to is one that's usually done by somebody who isn't necessarily, innocent of the crime per se, but trying to get off of it by some other means. I just don't understand the. I mean, like I said, that's the way I perceive that tactic, as it being one of not somebody who's innocent per se.
And coming from your background and your experience and your knowledge and your training, that would make sense to you, because that's what you know. And me being on the other side of it, oh shoot, man, I lie out of my teeth when I'm guilty, trying to find a way to not be guilty. Whereas there's been times where I was innocent and I either tried to speak and it didn't work in my benefit because something flipped and I got connected to somebody else, and then it was a duo thing, or nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to give me the time to hear that. They would say, hey, you're going to have your opportunity to speak when we get you to X, Y, and Z hearings. And you know how the court process, well, especially in big cities,
Mhm.
You get shifted through that court system quick. You don't get a lot of time to talk, and your public defender's not listening. Ann Taylor is. Ann Taylor
Yeah.
is. Give her credit. She's filing every motion. She's doing everything possible. I wish I had an attorney that just cared. Not so much that was the greatest of attorneys in the world, but one that actually cared to listen to me and say, okay, we'll file that motion. We'll do that. We'll do this.
Right.
And I've never had that. So, you're right. The prosecution and the defense, they both have tactics they have to utilize to get this case to trial.
Mhm.
Prosecution wants to get it to trial intact with as much evidence as possible, witnesses still handy, and everything, in a good time frame for the victims' families and everything to flow smoothly.
Mhm.
And the defense wants to pick apart the case from minute one and take every step that they can to nullify evidence, let witnesses kind of unforget things. And, it's like, okay. So, yeah, it's a tactic. It absolutely is. And that's why I've told people, if you guys think this case is going to trial in a year, you're crazy. If you think it's 2 years, you're crazy. This is one of those ones that's a 5-year down the road and 20-some years in the appeals court.
Right.
It's just what it is. It's sad, but that's the way these things work. And I'm sure you agree. It's a forever process.
In this situation, I'm fairly positive it is going to be a quite a while process, just given the fact that you have a quadruple homicide, the severity, the public attention into it. So, yeah, no, I'm fairly confident that it's going to be. I know it's not going to be this year. I think there's a slim chance it could be sometime late next year, but I think 2026 is probably going to be the year that it probably goes down.
I just think it's always crazy how the courts push things back, and they push them back, and then they push it back again. Like somebody gets sick, and that's another 3 months pushed back. You miss it. The judge could get sick for 3 months, and now we're 6 months back on just simple time frames. So, that's why it's so hard on these things. And that's why you and I will be talking for the next couple of years, trying to make sense of all of this.
So where do you stand? Are you seem to be somebody that's on the fence? Is that correct?
Yeah, I have definitely not found him guilty. Just because I'm open-minded and I'm still willing to listen to everything possible, but I'm also not ignorant. So I know there's that possibility. So I got to say I'm right down the line. And that's why I tell you, Danny, I'm real big in, let's watch how the process works. Let's see how it all unfolds. And if the justice system holds accountability for what it truly stands for, there's a good chance he's guilty and he's going to get convicted on the charges. If flaws start coming up, as you and I know, I've heard you talk about other cases where you have questions. It can happen. Questions can arise. Things can come out. We'll see what happens, and we'll go from there.
Right.
But I just personally will not jump on board. I feel for the victims' families, Danielle. I really do. But I don't make emotional decisions on guilt or innocence. I just want to see the facts. And that's it. That's all.
Right. No, I understand that 100%. I used to be somewhere in the middle as well. Back in the day, what made me not kind of go into saying, hey, I think the police have the wrong guy. And I'm not saying that he's guilty. I'd like to see the rest of the evidence as well. I just think that police pretty much got the right guy. I think he's the guy. Now, can I say he's 100% guilty today? No, I don't think I've ever said he's 100% guilty today. But for me, when I was a little bit more on the fence, so to speak, what kept me on the fence from saying that, I think he didn't do it, was the amount of the DNA that was in the sheath. Howard Bloom, they had an article out there, made it seem like it was a small amount of DNA and that they had to send it to a lab somewhere else to get it picked up. And that wasn't the case. It was actually a pretty good size amount of DNA, enough to match a significant amount of unique identifiers of Bryan Kohberger to come up with a sequence of 1 in 5 octillion chances of somebody else being the owner of the DNA. Anyways, that is what made me say, maybe he didn't do something. It's a small amount. It could be just, there's something there. And then there was on the other side that made me say, you know what, maybe he did do something, was the fact that his phone was off. So those were the two pieces of evidence that had me swaying. Now, once we found out that 5 octillion time match or whatever came back for Bryan Kohberger, that told me that the amount of DNA wasn't small. So, you know, when you have a degraded amount of DNA or you have a small amount of DNA, it'll usually result in a smaller amount of likelihood somebody else could be the owner of that DNA. Meaning that if it was like a 50%, I guess, sample, and I think you can match up to 19%, you might have something in like 1 in 5 million or 1 in 1 billion, but to get 1 in 5 octillion or whatever it was, leads me to believe that it was a large amount. So once you had that, and you also had the phone being off and everything else, that led me to believe that this guy's more than likely the guy that committed this crime. What's holding you on the fence?
So literally what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, the circumstantial evidence all added together is leading you to feel as though he's the right person, because you're taking each piece of evidence separately and putting them in together into one pool and saying, that's hard to overcome. That's hard to overcome.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's like most cases, you know, you get a pool of all the evidence. In very few cases is there one, you know, piece of evidence that is, there it is, you know, it's usually like something on camera, a confession, you know, those type of things are your big aha moments. But if you don't have those things, every case is going to be a combination of the evidence.
And I agree with you, because obviously I've been caught, I've been sentenced, and it was a combination of things that led to that. It was I never left one just big piece of evidence in my crime that got me nailed. It was a combination of, they saw me on camera there, they had a fingerprint over there, they had a shoe print over here, and they could combine all that together. And when they did that, they were able to put on a good enough case that they could explain things to the point that it was just like I didn't have a defense to get out of it.
Right.
I sit on the fence because, one, I just want to see the process from beginning to now work itself through to show itself done correctly and transparently. I feel as though the crime scene is already under speculation because of the fact there was most likely people in that home before the crime scene was secured. And some people would argue with me and say, what are you trying to say? That someone planted the sheet? No, I didn't say that. I'm just saying the crime scene has been compromised, and that's an issue because I don't know who's been in the home. I don't know the explanation of why they've been in the home. But that's most likely going to come out at some point. We're going to hear more about that. But that's a holdback for me.
Right.
I have an issue just even with the body cam footage of seeing the amount of people partying and things happening and the way that, you know, everything's handled. Yet on that night, it's just so odd. Like, it's just completely odd that night. And I've never been able to put my fingers on to why. And I know that doesn't come back as evidence to find someone innocent or guilty, but it gives you that gut feeling of the night just is so odd. It's just, what the hell was going on, you know? And I don't like to make believe on any type of evidence. I won't create evidence. I'm not going to speculate on, you know, what happened Washington State and they drug everybody back over to, I mean, I'm not going to say all that stuff, but I have an issue just following the lines to find guilt as of yet. I guess that's the best way to explain it. I just can't find him guilty. I just haven't got there.
So, I understand. But as far as, you know, the house itself as well, it doesn't sound like anybody went up to disturb the third floor crime scene. It sounds like, from what I understand and from what I've known and from what I've spoken with the family members and stuff, is that the only room that was, I guess, somebody tried to open was Ethan and Xana's room. And so from what I understand is the door was locked or blocked. I'm not entirely sure, but the other thing that I understand is a lot of the crime scene was contained to the bedrooms, and if they didn't get into it in that manner, then I'm not sure there's going to be this concern about the scene being contaminated, needless to say. And I think that the other thing that we can tell as far as how well preserved, maybe perhaps, that the crime scene was taken care of was when you look at the probable cause affidavit and you see the two different ones between the two officers. And I know it's a lot of conspiracy there when it talks about the knife sheath and location and whatnot, but in the probable cause affidavit it says that the knife sheath was to Mogen's right side when viewed from the door, not that the knife sheath was visible from the door. So it was basically trying to give a location. The other officer had to be notified later. Now, if we go back and we look at the house is relatively small, and you have a crime scene in there. What most likely happened is you probably had your lead investigator along with a forensic investigator actually walk into the crime scene. The forensic investigator probably pointed out the knife sheath. The secondary investigator had no business going in there. He's not the lead investigator. And if you had, I think the description was that Kaylee's body was up against the corner there, as if she climbed up and was, her back was to the corner. That leads me to believe that both Maddie and Kaylee's feet were probably towards the door. And if that be the case, then from the door, if she's like maybe on her side or face forward and the knife sheath is underneath her or on the right side, if you're only able to view from the door, you wouldn't be able to see the knife sheath, which is why somebody would have to tell you after the fact. And like I said, that room was very small. There's a lot of evidence in there. Only a very small amount of people are going to go in there. Not just everybody. And the detective's second guy, Fiddle, isn't one of them. He's not a guy that's going to be allowed to be in there just to kind of go and look at the things. That's what the lead detective is for. And so just knowing that they did those things tells me also that they probably took care of the scene a lot better than we anticipated.
In your mind, do you feel comfortable in the fact that it took the lead detective, the lead investigator, that extra amount of time to get to the scene? Did that ever kind of in your mind ring as well? It just seems as though maybe the scene sat a little longer than it should have. I'm not saying they didn't secure it. I'm just saying, wow, that's a long time for a lead investigator to get to a quadruple homicide crime scene.
Well, that's if that's the first time he had arrived. What we do know is that Kaylee Goncalves has told us that she had gained information by 1:32 a.m. or p.m. that her daughter had passed, and she was starting to make phone calls. One of those calls was to Jack DeCore, who wasn't answering. He had already been picked up and was questioned or was being questioned by police. Now, when she spoke to Jack afterwards, from what I understand is he woke up from his neighbor or from his roommates, woke him up, told him something was going on down the street at Kaylee's house, and they walked out and cops were already there. So if the 911 call came in, so that's between noon and 1:30 is the time where he was awakened, walked out there. He immediately got there and told them that he was the ex-boyfriend of somebody that resides in the house, and they picked him up and they took him in for questioning. Now, the second day that this was going down, the mayor had came out saying that this was a crime of passion. Now, there's got to be a reason why he said it's a crime of passion. He's talking to some detectives. Now, they're probably not giving him, all the details, but probably enough to say that most likely that this was an ex-boyfriend or something like that. And at the time, what evidence did we know? We know that Kaylee had just broken up with Jack. We know that Kaylee was with Jack that night at the corner club. And we know that Jack lives down the street and that Kaylee was leaving town. We know that from the Goncalves family, that one of the victims appeared to have had more significant injuries than the others, and that just so happened to be Kaylee. So all signs day one are probably pointing towards a crime of passion. And Man, what was your question? I said all that to get to that point, and I forgot the main part.
Just kind of your gut feeling on how you felt about the lead investigator being one of the last people to actually arrive.
So if your main suspect in a quadruple homicide is outside and they take him down to the station, he says he's willing to talk and hasn't lawyered up, are you going to wait to go walk the crime scene before you talk to him, or are you going to go talk to him right away?
Well, I'd go to talk. I mean, you got to, but you also, I mean, God, that's a hard one because you got to secure the evidence. You got to be able to convict the guy, you know, by the evidence. Now, if the guy's confessing and talking, you got it. You got it.
Right.
You got it. But I think you and I both know Bryan Kohberger wasn't in a interrogation room talking.
No, not that time. But at that time, you had somebody who was the ex-boyfriend that probably looked like, you know, somebody of prime interest. And so if you have somebody of prime interest willing to say, hey, you know, what happened? I was there last night. What's going on? Tell me what happened. Here's my phone. Here's my stuff. And he's 100% cooperating. You're not going to wait for that person to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I should get a lawyer. No, you're going to rush in there and you're going to try to get that done as soon as possible. So my assumption is that Payne probably did arrive there right away. He probably didn't get an opportunity to go through a detailed walkthrough as he wanted to. And I think that Jack DeCour's presence alongside with Bethany and Dylan, you know, them two were probably also prime suspects early on in this investigation. So there's a good opportunity that maybe perhaps, you know, he was getting preliminary information from them if they were open about what was going on, you know, during that time. You know, time is of the essence. And so
that's kind of what I was going to kind of get with you on too. How many people you think they grabbed right away to take to the station to put into individual rooms? I would have to say Dylan Mortenson was one. Bethany Funke went in another room. Jack DeCour went into another room. But I would have to feel as though there were more people at least brought down to discuss.
Probably Hunter Johnson.
Yeah, I would feel, I mean, whoever got the phone call or whatever happened to come over, I would think, but I just feel as though there's so many people that could have been brought down to be talked to. I mean, I'm kind of surprised Enon Harsh never like just got tackled and brought in because he was making a spectacle of himself right from the get-go, trying to implant himself into something he probably was never a part of.
Right.
You know, and I don't know, because most people I know that make themselves known like that get tore up by cops. You're coming with us, you're going in this room, and we're going to video and audio record everything going on. I mean, do you, in your opinion, feel all of that's audio and video recorded? They have all of that probably.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't doubt that. And as far as did they separate them and stuff like that, from the information that I have from people very close to this, almost pretty much damn near the horse's mouth, they were all separated and stuff like that. And I do also know that what was in the PCA about, you know, masked man in the house and things of that nature, 4 a.m., somebody walking in, walking out, that was all said day one, night one. That was information that was out there. And I also know that information was out there pretty early on, because that information was also leaked to us, not from who it was, who told us this, but it was leaked to us early on Reddit. And people were talking about somebody seeing somebody walking around with a mask and a bunch of other things. We thought it was bull crap. Like me and the guys, when we saw it, we're like, man, how is somebody going to see somebody and not call 911? You know what I mean? So we had all those same thoughts. We had all those, you know, same concerns and questions through that. And it didn't make any sense. And then when it happened, the first thing that me and Jaime said to each other almost at the same time was, I guess Reddit got one right, because we were shocked, you know. And so what that tells me is that there's a good chance that some information has been, you know, released that's out there that's accurate, but that was some of it that was released. We had emails about that for a while. We didn't believe it, and that's why we didn't say it.
I think in every type of case, Daniel, and I'm sure you'll agree, legitimate information does get leaked. It does get let out. The problem is the whole pile on of the additional garbage that goes on top of that makes it hard to decipher and pick through. But that's why gag orders are so, you know, good to have put in place, because now you're protecting real from the garbage. And I get all that. Something stands out to me that's still kind of makes me think a lot, and maybe you could give me your feelings on it. It would be the body cam footage of the young lady whose car got broken into, and like her luggage got moved around and her panties got put into the center console of the car. To me, that just kind of, it opened my eyes a little bit. It gave me a feel for the area, not a feel like I know it well, or I lived there, or I know everybody within it, but a feel of like an eerie feeling that something's going on here. Like if that was your child, your daughter, and you had heard somebody say that, or if she called you and told you about that, you'd be freaking out. So would I. And it just seems like it got thrown to the side. Like it's nothing that could play a part in this. And I still think about that a lot. I really think about that a lot.
And then there was a lot of things that have gone on in that town. I mean, it's a college town. It's a party town. There's a lot of alcohol involved in a lot of things. You know, I've talked to a lot of people from the area. You know, there's been a lot of stuff that has gone down that's, what's the word I'm looking for? Like haze-like almost and stuff like that. So, you know, I get it. And those things need to be investigated. And I'm sure those things were investigated. We're not going to hear about those investigations because they have nothing to do with Bryan Kohberger committing this crime. He's the person that's being alleged to have committed this crime. So the only thing that we should hear is whether or not there was something that is relevant to the case or that exonerates him or is exculpatory. The rest of the stuff or the rest of the investigation that didn't amount to anything, we're never going to hear. Like, for instance, we're never going to know where Jack Showalter went after, you know, the corner or after the grub truck, like for sure. That's never going to come out. Jack Showalter's, you know, he might be a witness just because he saw the victims there at the corner club and at the grub truck. But, you know, if he actually can prove that he was somewhere else, you know, Ann Taylor can't grill him about something that is proven that he was somewhere else. And so, like I said,
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Daniel. What is the biggest thing to you that really in your heart makes it Bryan Kohberger was definitely in that home? He was definitely there. He definitely did it. What is it? The DNA? Is it something else in your mind? Do you think there's another piece of evidence that really ties it together? But what puts him in the home in your mind?
Cool. And I'll answer that one. Let me just kind of get to these real quick. I want to say thank you, Mikey S., for gifting a Drunk Turkey Show membership. 49er Girl has been a member for 9 months. And Johnny Archer says, happy belated birthday to Maddy Mogen, May 25th. Yes, 100%. So to me, like I said, it's not just one piece of evidence. It's the combination of evidence. To me, when it comes to this problem, it's very much like a math problem. And when I look at it, I look at something like, and I like to use the example of 5 + 5 + 10 + 10 = 30. And sometimes people will argue with me and say, no, because 5 + 10 = 15. And I get that's true, but it doesn't account for the other numbers. And so when I look at the evidence and I look at it as a whole, and I look at it going through it, I account for all the evidence. So you have DNA. How can we put this? Let's start off with Bryan Kohberger just being out and about the night of the murders. Yeah, Bryan Kohberger out at the same time that a quadruple homicide is happening at 4 a.m. on an icy, cold, overcast night. You know, what are the chances in that you are going to be out when one of those things happens? Now, what are the chances that while you're out and one of those things is happening, that person also matches your height and weight and gender? You know, what are they then? Do those chances increase or decrease when you find out that they're also driving or occupying a very similar vehicle to yours, up to the point where both of you don't have a front license plate? And then what are the chances that during this time that your phone is also not going to be connected to the network, proving where you were at? And after all that, what are the chances that person also is going to have your DNA or Bryan Kohberger's DNA inside of that car at the same time? Now, we have audio and we have a bunch of things that determine when this crime had occurred. It occurred between 4 and 4:30 or 4 and 4:20. Now, regardless of who committed the crime, we can pretty much all assume that that's when it happened. We see a white vehicle that is traveling that's not seen during that specific time, but that had entered into that area on a one-way in, one-way out. And, where the DNA is also important. A lot of people will run and say, well, it's a movable object. It's a movable object. I think that it would probably be more in Bryan Kohberger's favor if his DNA was in a common area where it would be easy for somebody to have bumped into someone or came across his DNA and then accidentally rubbed his arm or whatever, her arm on Bryan Kohberger's DNA. And then in the hallway, it rubbed up there. That's a common area. It's not in a common area. It's in the buttons, a button snap of the sheath. It's inside it. Now, it's not anybody else's. It's only his DNA. It's single source. So typically when you have something that's accidentally transferred, and it's not in every case, but most of the time when you have something that is transferred by another person, it's usually a multi-source DNA because it's transferred onto somebody's person, and somebody's person is usually filled with their DNA. So the fact that those things exist, and the phone being off during that specific time, I find it highly unlikely that it would be anybody else. Now, I'm open to some sort of explanation or something of that nature that could explain those things. I haven't heard of one yet. All the arguments that are out there right now, I think can be debunked fairly easily through the process of deduction. And, like I said, I'm open, me not thinking that the University of Idaho had some sort of hand in it, because I can't, to me, it would take things that are impossible to happen for the University of Idaho to be somewhat involved in this cover up or murder. And those things just don't make sense. Now, if somebody can explain something that has a story that explains the car, the front bumper, without the license plate, the phone, the DNA, all those things, I'm open to hear it too. You know what I mean?
Well, that's one thing. I've never been one that spoke in regards to University of Idaho. I don't know what everything about. I'm not from that area. I don't go to college there. I don't know the key players. I know, unfortunately, their educational institution has been thrown under the bus by many. And, it's unfortunate that they've been put into a spotlight like that. But I think anywhere where a case like this happens, rumors like that and people start talking and stuff gets, opened up about that. But I'm not one that dove into that route. That's not a route that I've dove. And we all have opinions. And I've always, since the very beginning, I felt a very experienced person that has done it before or has done things that led to this before. Because unfortunately, I've been around some pretty mass killers. I sat down at lunch with them in the chow, and you kind of get the sense, even when you're not near them, you get the sense of them. They're there. They are. And I personally haven't got that same feeling about Kohberger that some relay that they have. They see and feel things from him and how he's talked to people and interacted. And I guess I've just never gotten that. But I can't say it's wrong. If you were to strip that DNA, let's say that DNA gets removed out of this case, and I'm not saying it's going to, because it most likely isn't. But if somehow that gets removed out of this case, how else do you put him in the house outside of that sheath? Like, what other evidence do you feel there is that he was actually in the home, not driving around it, not out about at night, not turning off phones? I get what you're saying about that. But I'm saying actually physically in the home, in between those rooms, of 7 minutes worth of carnage, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, first, fortunately, he forgot the knife sheath, because I think it would be very difficult to try this person without it. Now, I do think that they would have discovered that this was the guy, sooner or later. He was being reported on multiple times at WSU. There was some there was, like I said, there was multiple reports of his behaviors that were going on there. I'm sure somebody would have at one point said, hey, why don't you look at this guy? He's been acting kind of crazy. He's fighting teachers, harassing women, yada, yada, yada. And, they would have discovered that he drives a white Elantra and probably would have looked at his phone records and seen that his phone was off during the commission of the crime, which is a huge red flag. They see that he's out and about during that time on an icy cold night without his phone. That's concerning. So now, would they have enough to try him for it? I don't know. I don't know if they would have had enough to have picked him up and arrested him. That's one thing that I'm glad we don't have to worry about. I, for one, don't think that the DNA is going to get thrown out either. I know a lot of people think that that's a possibility. I think it's an impossibility at this point.
So to pick your brain just a little bit, the DNA is what got him arrested, in your opinion? The DNA on the sheath?
Oh, that's what pointed to him. Yeah. And then
I didn't think they had that until right before the arrest. And then they're saying they didn't use that to get the affidavit for arrest.
Right. They didn't.
In your opinion, if they didn't use that, what got the arrest? Do you think it's witness testimony? You think it's informant's information? What really led to the arrest if it's not the DNA?
Right. Well, first, thank you, Lena, from True Transparency, hanging out. $4.99 token for a good combo with good people. Thank you. So obviously, I think that the IGG pointed at him. But just because the IGG points at somebody or somebody comes in and says something, it doesn't mean that you can go and arrest someone. You have to build a case. You have to build evidence and things of that nature. So I do think that, for one, that the IGG is what pointed the law enforcement into the direction of Bryan Kohberger. Now, they couldn't just go and arrest him. I think that they went out there and they attempted to try to pull his DNA from his apartment complex. They probably were watching that area. According to the New York Times, the IGG came back December 19th, which makes sense because all of the warrants for Bryan Kohberger come back after December 23rd. Now, they waited, 4 days to get the warrants for his phone pings. My assumption is that they were trying to find him during those 4 days. And because he had already been to the Poconos in Pennsylvania by then. And, by the time they found where he was at, they needed to move. And I'm assuming that they then pulled out the warrants on the 23rd for his phone ping. And at the same time, I think the next day or 2 days later is when they arrived in Pennsylvania. Then they pulled the trash from his dad's house. Now, that trash pool is 100% legal. There ain't nothing anybody can do about that. And that trash pool pointed towards when they swabbed that the DNA that they found in that trash pool, it came back to the father of the suspect, or the father of the person who left the DNA on the sheath. And that right there is enough to get phone ping warrants. That right there is enough to get a warrant for his buccal swab, and so on and so on. And so, when people say that the probable cause affidavit is irrelevant at this point, that's what they mean. Like, since his arrest, there's been things that no longer make the PCA irrelevant. Like, you don't have to fall back on Bryan Kohberger's dad's DNA. You can fall back on Bryan Kohberger's DNA, which happened after the arrest. You don't really have to fall back on the phone pings. You can also fall back on his GPS locations that they'll be able to present later on, and so on and so on.
Now, one experience I had, Daniel, in my very first case I ever got arrested on, I actually got the PCA thrown out and my arrest overturned, which deemed my DNA inadmissible in court because the buccal swab was no longer validated for that arrest. That cost them the case. I hate to say it, I continued my path down the wrong road. I didn't learn my lesson like, hey, I got lucky, I got to get out of this. I kept doing what I was doing, but could you see a scenario where that buccal swab, because I have a feeling they're going to attack that. They're going to go at that. The arrest warrant and everything's going to be under a huge microscope in the defense's mind. Whether they win that or not, I don't know. But that would be an attack point that they could legitimately go after and get that buccal swab completely off the table, which takes away any DNA match at that.
Yeah, but I don't see them able to take out something as legal as a trash pool. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter why they were out there or whatever the case may have been. A psychic could have done a rain dance and Bryan Kohberger's name could have been spelled in the clouds. That doesn't mean that they can go and arrest him. They still have to build a case. And so what they did was they picked up that DNA. They got the phone pings that shows that his phone wasn't connected to the towers during the time of the murders, which is suspicious. He was also out and about, which I know a lot of people also say, what's the difference between Bryan Kohberger saying that he doesn't know where he was at and somebody saying they were asleep at home? Somebody saying they were asleep at home is saying where they were during a specific location at a specific time. Bryan Kohberger is not. He's just saying he's driving around with no specific time. In fact, I think the wording on it was at no specific time or date or location is he saying that he was anywhere, just that he was driving around. So,
in your opinion, do you feel as though the cast report that Mowry is working on is going to match up to that PCA? Do you think they're going to be able to match that up? Or do you think there's going to be something that the defense is onto here that could legitimately change whether the phone was there, not there, whether it was off, wasn't off? I mean, you can go into dead zones. I mean, I've done it. And I mean, I don't know. I just don't fully trust it, I guess, till I see it. And I feel like what we've seen in the PCA hasn't been corroborated yet. And then the way he spoke about it on the stand, and I'm not a knowledgeable expert on it, so I can't say, but it just seemed maybe there's some there that's not going to add fully up, because they even said they had a mistake ping out of the 12 pings or whatever it was. They admitted to a mistake ping in their own PCA, which could show there's issues.
No, they didn't admit to a mistake ping. What they said was that Bryan Kohberger's phone connected to a tower in Moscow, but that they don't believe he was in Moscow. So what that means is that he was outside of Moscow city limits, probably somewhere south of Moscow, within the tower's reach, probably in the area in which they suspect that he was at the night before. Give me 1 second.
So poor wording, not a mistake ping. That's poor wording.
Correct.
A ping that they've stated he was not right next to the home. He was somewhere farther away, and it still hit the tower, which makes sense.
And I think that also is trying to show the accuracy of which those strengths of those signals are, that they can determine, even though he's pinging in Moscow, that he wasn't in Moscow because of the cast information. To me, that's showing the strength of the accuracy of the locations.
Now, what did they use to get that information if this detective and everybody's been stating they didn't have the cast report? What were they going, because you're more into that field, what would they utilize to confirm those pings without that cast information?
Oh, well, they had the cast information a long time ago. I mean, the officer had it with him in his possession. Like I said, I think that was all just a tactic, but at the end of the day, is that tactic going to have an effect on the trial? No. But when it comes down to what, is, the defense's expert going to be able to show something different than what the prosecution has, I highly doubt it, because at this point they've said exactly the same thing that the prosecution said. According to the PCA, Bryan Kohberger's phone puts him south and southwest of Moscow. It doesn't put him at the murder house. The suspicion behind it is the fact that it's not connected to any tower during that time. Now, I understand that there's dead spots and things of that nature, but where he went out of service was in the middle of Pullman. And so we would have to believe that he was the only person to have cell service issues throughout that time and have cell service issues continually throughout that night. And then also, when it comes to Sly Ray or Cy Ray, his argument is the Floyd cannabis dispensary camera. They're not arguing, 4 o'clock, 4:20, 4:30, where Bryan Kohberger was. Their argument is the Floyd cannabis shop. Now, if the probable cause affidavit says that Bryan Kohberger is suspected to have left from the Nevada Street area towards SR 270, which is a road that connects to Moscow. If they believe that he's the vehicle seen on 270 in front of Floyd's dispensary, that would be around 2:55 in the morning. So the fact that they are arguing that their only argument at this point is where he was at an hour before the murders, if they knew where he was at, or if they had, those documentation, that evidence that says he was somewhere else, or a picture of the sky, they wouldn't be arguing where he was at 3 o'clock. They'd be arguing where he was at 4 o'clock during the murders and saying, hey, it's impossible for him to be the murderer because at 4 o'clock when the murders were happening, he was over here. But they're not arguing that. They're arguing 3. So that tells
Well,
me
if they put him in a place at 3 o'clock that doesn't allow for the time frame of that PCA of driving around at 3:29, I mean, what I feel they're doing is they're trying to disprove that that's Bryan Kohberger's car in the time frame that's being stated.
right, and I don't disagree with you, but the time frame that they're referencing is an hour before the time frame in which the prosecution is wanting his alibi and his location. So
Right.
even
They're
if
asking for 4 o'clock to 4:30.
right, and he's trying to say, well, I'm not the car over here at 3. So even if that isn't him, that doesn't say that he's not the car at 3:28 the first time in Indian Hills Drive, and that he didn't go some other location or some other route. And so by the method of deduction, we can deduce that since they're not arguing where he was at 4 o'clock, that they have no evidence of where Bryan Kohberger was at 4 o'clock, which Ann Taylor has said much of. She said that there was a hearing in which where they were trying to do a motion to compel, and they were asking for the prosecution's information. And the prosecution, Bill Thompson, said, we can't give you what doesn't exist or what we don't have. And when they asked for the alibi, Ann Taylor said in response that, well, we can't give you what Bryan Kohberger hasn't told us. He's only told us what we have been able to tell you. And she doubled down on that a few months ago. And so he hasn't even told them where he was at that night.
I don't know. In working with my defense attorneys, I'm pretty sure he has. I'm pretty
Then
sure.
she committed perjury in court multiple times.
And I'm not going to say that she did. I mean, I can't confirm that. I'm just saying, like, legitimately, in the discussions I've had before, even when I'm trying to stay mute overall in the courtroom, that doesn't mean I don't try to give pointers to my attorney of things that can be used. I think Bryan Kohberger is intelligent enough to slide things to her, to give her a perception of where to attack and why to attack it. And, I get what you're saying in regards to the 3 o'clock time frame, that, the prosecution zoned in on this very time that they want, where is Bryan Kohberger at? And that's 4 o'clock to 4:30. And really someone like me would come back and say, I get it, I understand. But there's a reason why you want that time, which is you're putting Bryan Kohberger in the area, you're putting him at the home, and you have to have something that's going to give you that idea that he's there. So many are thinking it's got to be the video footage that we're seeing. Well, we're not seeing it, but they're seeing. And if it's not the correct car, because where I'm also hung up, Daniel, and I can't throw out his car as being the car, but damn, don't put up a stock photo up of a dealership lot of a Hyundai Elantra. If you're looking for a car and you're putting out a Bolo, and you know this from your background, you're going to get somebody. You're looking for that very car. You're calling that car out to the community to get that car. You put up a still photo of that car. You go in your video footage, you've got lots of it. If you've got him on camera from 3:29 to, let's say, peeling away at 4:25, just take a quick still photo and put it out to the public. Now we've all seen the exact car you're looking for, and there's no argument whether it's real or not. We see it. We know what it is. I can't dispute what's visually there. Does that make sense?
No, I don't disagree with you.
I mean, do you agree with the use of a stock photo instead of an actual footage photo?
Well, what I said back then was, when they did that, and they held water all the way to this point, is that they probably don't have a clear image of it. The image that they have of it is probably a side profile. It's probably blurry. It's probably very difficult for somebody who doesn't have a trained eye to determine what kind of vehicle it is. And when you want somebody who doesn't have an untrained eye, you want them to be out there looking for something. You want them to be very clear of what you're looking for. Now, we found out in this recent hearing that the city of Moscow doesn't retain those images or those I guess, video at the traffic lights, which makes sense. I had said this back then. I said, man, I think this guy had to have gotten here and avoided all these traffic lights, because if they had a traffic camera on him, it would have had a better quality picture. And, you would be able to see what kind of vehicle it is, maybe even a license plate number, things of that nature. And then we find out they can't get that info. And, well, for one, I think that also, somebody had told me about that before, from that area, that was true. Before I found that out. So I was wondering if that was common knowledge, maybe a reason why the killer attacked the city of Moscow versus Pullman, because they knew that the cameras aren't saved, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, those things still, I still believed in those things. I said that, hey, what they probably have is ring camera footage. And when you're looking at ring cameras and you're looking at security cameras, those are cameras that are usually facing towards the street. So you're going to capture profile pictures or profile video of the car. Very rarely you're going to catch a front or the rear. Now, the only camera that catches the front and the rear that I'm aware of is the 1112 King Road residence ring cam, the one that's 50 feet away from Xana's apartment. That one is pointed right at the King Queen intersection, but it's not the best camera. And there's cars there that are right in front of it, and they're off. They don't have headlights on or things like that. And it's kind of hard to determine certain things. So
how would they present that at trial? How would they come in with the evidence of the white Hyundai Elantra at trial at that point?
Because the only thing that matters is, can an expert say that vehicle is not a 2015? Now, it doesn't matter if at first they thought it was a 2019 Sentra, or in the middle if they thought it was a 2011. None of that matters. What matters is, can an expert go in there and say that it's not a 2015? And if the expert can go in there and say, hey, you know what? Because this is the other reason why I believe they didn't get Bryan Kohberger's name until after the IGG. They probably didn't look at the WSU cameras until after Bryan Kohberger's name came out. And at that point, they were able to determine that it was a 2015. And they went back and looked and said, hey, is it possible that this vehicle here could also be a 2015? And he couldn't rule it out. Now, that's what's important in that situation. It doesn't matter what they thought it was. It's, what is it? Can it be ruled out? Can an expert go in there and say, hey, no, this isn't a 2015, this is a 2013? And if that's not the case, then, I mean, we're arguing about nothing, and it's just going in circles.
Well, I mean, it is actually going to be an argument in the trial. I'm sure you understand, because the defense will call their expert witness that says, no, I don't agree with the prosecution's witness. I say it's X and Y and Z. And now it's a battle of the minds and the words in the courtroom. And I just have a gut feeling that could nullify itself out in the courtroom. I don't see
that's if they find an expert that can do that. We haven't seen any evidence that they have a vehicular expert that's going to attest the accuracy of the description of the vehicle. Now, I do think that they are going to question it, mainly because they brought it up earlier, when they said, we don't know what happened first, the identification of the car or the IGG or whatever the case may have been. Right. So I do think that it's probably going to end up being a discussion point, maybe, perhaps. It just kind of depends, because the state can just object, and they say, hey, isn't it true that you guys thought it was, some other car? And they say objection, relevance. Now we're not excluding this car from being it. Now, if you have an expert that says that it excludes it because they can point something out that is only unique to an earlier model, then we'll see. But I haven't seen that witness on their witness list or anything like that. And yet, not all of it's out there. So, not saying it doesn't exist. Just saying.
Yeah, time's going to tell. We're going to work our way through the process, and that's coming up. We're going to start seeing witness lists and experts, and I think that'll be telling to see from the defense side of things, what are they going to attack? I think you can see by the witness list put together by a defense, what are they confidently going to try to attack, and what are they going to shy away from and try to not attack? I get that. I fully understand it, because there's some battles you can't win. even as a defense, kid, where I'm like, we got to attack that. They'll look right at me and say, we can't win that. Like there's no reason to do it. We can't win. We don't want to talk about it. We want to set that aside and leave that alone, leave it alone. But,
Right.
And that's why I'm so on the fence, Daniel. And it's not that I don't want someone to get away with a crime like this if they committed the crime like this.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm a firm believer. You go take the punishment for what you've done. I've had to do it in my past, and it's not fun, but you got to do it. And I kind of believe you got to step up like a man. If you did something, you step up and you go take the punishment for it. I know the process of having to go through court. I personally haven't gotten, I'm just not there. Like I have not been convinced. And people say I hate law enforcement or I hate the system no, I like due process. I like the facts. I like it to work appropriately. I like to be able to understand it, put it all together and say, bam, I got it. It makes sense. And I'm just not there yet. So
I want to answer this one. Elizabeth asked, how do we know what Sly Ray is going to say tomorrow? It's because that's what the defense put out in their paperwork. It says that Bryan Kohberger has expert testimony. Sly Ray, who is going to testify that the vehicle in front of Floyd's dispensary wasn't him or whatever the case may be. So that's why we know. And and I get it. And I get it. So do you think that the DNA is Bryan Kohberger's?
I can't argue with the octillions or whatever it comes back to. That's not something that's arguable in my opinion. I think the argument that's going to be made and it's going to be, how did it get there? Why is it there? DNA to me has always been you're locked up, you're done. You can't overcome this, but then the types of DNA that I'm learning about and the way it can be moved and transferred, I think it's hard to overcome in a court of law if your DNA is found at a quadruple homicide. And that's why I believe they're attacking said DNA before they get to the trial, because they know once that's introduced, that is very damaging to any defense. Very, very damaging. I mean, I don't know how you get reasonable doubt on DNA.
Right.
I just don't know how you get that. But
right. Do you think that if Bryan Kohberger is innocent, how do you explain his DNA being on the sheath?
And that's the biggest question that, at the end of the day, I would have to understand better. If I don't know if it was his sheath or he touched it at the store. I'm not saying that Bryan Kohberger didn't even handle the sheath. I mean, maybe he did. I don't know. The defense would have to put up a pretty good argument as to why his DNA would be on that sheath and him not have some sort of connection to that sheath. But I'm willing to be open-minded and hear that out before I convict him just based on that. I just want to hear, I want to know, put that puzzle piece together for me, helping me better understand that you did everything correctly, because I know mistakes do happen as well. And then I'll never argue. I'll go off, I'll ride into the sunset. We'll talk about another case and we'll get moving forward. But, I'm just, that's the hard part, Daniel, and that's a great question. How do you say Bryan Kohberger didn't do it? And if you do say that, who do you say did do it?
I don't know.
That's hard. That's hard.
Right.
That's hard. That's investigators' jobs. That's really not mine. That's their job. And they've got the tools and the expertise to do that. So
right. And I know a lot of people are saying that the DNA is on a movable object. The problem is that movable object was moved in there by the killer. Like I said, it'd be one thing if it was in a common area, on a doorknob or in a hallway or on a table where there was a bunch of other drinks and people that were hanging out and stuff like that. But when it's a single source piece of DNA underneath the body of a victim, that's when it becomes concerning. Now, I know a lot of people, and I'm not saying that it's yourself, but I know a lot of people in the live chat seem to believe that, this DNA was planted. Now, my question when it comes to that has always been, Well, when did they decide to do that? If the Idaho State lab was, or Idaho State forensic team was out there day one and they collected the sheath and turned in the sheath, the DNA into CODIS pretty relatively soon. How long was it when the University of Idaho decided enough is enough? This has been a long time. We need to find somebody. And if it wasn't immediately, and if it was a week, 2 weeks, a month into the investigation when this happened, how are law enforcement going to go in there and fix or change what was placed into CODIS and all these other DNA sequences that have been taken out? So to me, I think that it's 100% his DNA. I think that there was not planted. It was not put there by law enforcement or anybody else. And I think it's going to be a hard component for his defense team to explain, in my opinion.
And that's the thing. That's why, when we get to trial, that's what's going to be the most important thing, is what type of defense can you put up to the evidence that's rolled out before you? And that's, if that sheath is still in play and everything about it is still there and it's still all good to go, that's one that it's going to have a lot of, and you have to prove it. Like, the defense has to prove that as well, not in the sense that, they got to give all the, but they've got to have a good enough factual basis story that could create the reasoning why that would be there without him actually, you know what I mean? So it's going to be very interesting to see how they attack that. And it's going to be interesting to see how both sides attack certain things, because I think there's a lot of pressure on the prosecution here as well. I mean, they got to hold this together. They've got to, not allow it to get too wide out there and too speculative. They got to reel this back in and really put on their show too, and put on their evidence. And trial is going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting.
I agree with you on that one. There was some that I had seen that I wanted. All right. So how do they have enough of DNA to do these tests on? It was a speck you can't see with the naked eye. Well, I think that when you get the STR profile, the R is, what is it called? Like replicable, where it replicates the DNA sequence. And
something like that. I think they computerized it and it replicated. That was the whole discussion in one of the hearings that Bill Thompson had to step up, and everybody was saying there was a second profile. And there was a discussion about that, and I'm not a DNA expert on this.
Neither am I, which is why I was going to say, like, if somebody would have told me, hey, I can make 164 tons of metal fly, I'd probably be skeptical too. But then there's some engineer that's made this airplane that's freaking huge. And it flies 164,000 pounds or something like that. I don't know the tonnage or whatever it was, but huge chunk of metal flying in the air. So, just because I don't know how they did that, I don't know the avionics behind that, I don't know the DNA the DNA sequence and stuff. But I did talk with Miss Gabriela Vargas, the defense's witness, on the IGG and stuff, and she opened my eyes to about how much DNA you can use and what the IGG does and how it's affected on the STR profile or the lack thereof and things like that. And so it was an interesting conversation. Recommend go watch.
It's going to be the biggest part of the trial. I think, Daniel, you and I can admit we're going to spend weeks in this trial just on DNA and all the specifics of how they can test it and why they test it and how they replicate it. And most of us are going to be so novice that everything we're hearing, we're not even going to understand what we're hearing. And it's going to get kind of boring, but it's going to be a key part of the case.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think all of it is. I mean, and there's so much more also that we don't know. The results of some of the search warrants that they have. There's some stuff that's out there that's alleged. I can't put it up or pull it out to say, hey, look, this is real, but there's been alleged that there's been a receipt recovered for a K-bar knife and a K-bar knife sheath purchased by Bryan Kohberger. Those type of things are supposedly going to be coming out. I think there's going to be some testimony about potentially other people that may have had some issues, maybe some following type of issues as well. Those are the things that we're going to be hearing about. I've got some insider information on some of the the
I
student.
just think, you know, and I respect where you get your info. I respect the hard work you put in, the due diligence, the connections you make. You know, that's a big responsibility on your part to be able to make those relationships, hold them accountable, keep them concealed, you know, and that's amazing that you could do that. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think we also have to kind of reserve ourselves from the mainstream media's overall push based on emotion. Like, you know, I don't want to say their names, but the different big media outlets have done equal damage on one side as YouTube creators and other people have done on the other. And I feel as almost it's become a battle back and forth on, you
I
know,
don't
who can
disagree.
speak more intelligently on the case or who has more info, you know. The narrative that is being driven is a very strong emotional narrative. And we're already seeing from one of the very first times in my lifetime, actual documentaries, books being written, movies being produced on a case that's not even at trial yet. I have kind of a problem with that because if this kid does not get found guilty, if he is deemed innocent or gets released on these charges, he's never going to recover from that. Never. So in any route that we go right now, Daniel, this man is guilty. He's guilty. He's done. And I know people will say, well, he'll get a book deal. He'll make money. That don't matter. No.
Nah, he's not going to make any money. How much money did O.J. Simpson make? How much money did Casey Anthony make? They don't make anything.
What I'm trying to say. And, you know, people scream, hey, we need a dismissal right now. This case needs to. That's the last thing Bryan Kohberger right now wants. He does not want a dismissal. It all starts over. He gets it dismissed. He goes back to his jail cell. They rearrest him. They recharge him. And we start over again. And now just more time and money is invested into this. That's not what it needs to be. It just needs to work through the process. And, you know, I just think we got to really kind of keep the narrative to the point that a lot of things are unknown. A lot of things are unknown. And we don't need to make up more stuff to go into more unknowns. You know, it gets frustrating on a daily to hear new stuff, new rumors, new things being made up. And it's like, man, come on. That's so bogus. It's bogus. Yeah. We got to stop, you know. And that's why we got to let due diligence, we got to let the system work its way through this. And I don't think that we should accuse the defense of doing anything out of the realm of what they should be doing because they're fighting for their client's life and they're doing the most they can. The prosecution is going to be doing their taxings and doing what they're doing. And at some point, we all got to meet in the middle, go before a judge and have a trial. And at that point, we'll know more. So,
right. I mean, that's kind of like where, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that it's not going to stop anything. Like, for instance, this whole cast info, like, oh, he deleted this. All right, we'll throw out his testimony. The AT&T records still exist. Get another expert in there. They can redo the test and it's over with. It's nothing burger. It means nothing. And so, but yeah, you know, as far as Bryan Kohberger, this is going to go to trial. There's no doubt in my mind. Yeah, so it's either going to be a mistrial or acquitted or guilty, right? Those are going to be your three options here. And even if he gets acquitted or if there's a hung jury or whatever the case may be, and I know a lot of people think that he's going to sue and all this other stuff. Bryan Kohberger is going to get sued. He's going to get sued by the victim's family members. And in civil court, it's not beyond reasonable doubt. It's at 51%. And and you don't have, or you don't get the opportunity to hide behind the Fifth Amendment in one of those as well. You will testify. And so he probably doesn't want to go to trial or to a lawsuit. You know, he probably doesn't have footing to stand in a lawsuit against news media, against anybody, because at that point, just similar to O.J. Simpson, who got sued tremendously afterwards, who had to go and steal his own memorabilia, who ended up getting locked up for it. I mean, I don't see this grandeur idea that he's going to have this luxury life. That's not going to happen whatsoever.
And coming from, you know, and I feel for his family too. The Kohbergers here,
I do too.
There's a lot of pressure and hate on them, and they didn't do anything. You know, they tried to raise their family. They got successful daughters. And Bryan Kohberger was working his way through, a PhD program. So his parents put everything out for him to be successful, just like my parents did for me. I just made the choices I did and threw it all away. So, I mean, we got to keep an account to them. They're doing the right thing, staying out of the way, staying quiet, staying behind the darkness. They need to do that. They need to stay over there. And people need to stop picking at, why aren't they at the hearings or this? It's okay. Just let them handle it the way they feel is best for them and their family. And we should just let them do that. Just like, we should let others and the victims' families handle it the way they feel like they need to do it too, even though I've raised some concerns, but all genuinely, I want the best for them as well. We don't want to see this case, us as the people, Bryan Kohberger, the victims' families, nobody wants a mistrial here. That'd be a travesty. That'd be the worst ending of this you could possibly have.
I agree.
Nobody wants that. This needs to go to trial, and guilt or innocence needs to be proved. That's it. And either you're innocent or you're guilty. That's it. There's no fine line here that if he gets a mistrial, it's the best thing for him and the best. No, it's not. It's the worst thing in the world. So,
yeah. Sammy says, Daniel, you said on Dinkies that it's a fact that Bryan was forced to resign. Where did you hear this? Where is this a fact? We've seen his resignation letter where it says that I understand that if I don't resign, then I'll be facing a termination board, yada, yada, yada. And then I went down to the Pleasant Valley High School board meetings. I actually did a video on this not too long ago on a live showing. I recommend going back and checking it out. And I hope you understand what ended up happening was there was a grouping of people who were fired, or not fired, but who resigned due to one reason or another. I think it was like budget cuts, but Bryan Kohberger wasn't one of them. Bryan Kohberger's name was listed in those that were going to be replaced, not being terminated due to, budget cuts. They were actually replacing his position. And when you have a law enforcement entity, it's very common practice that you have your full-time, your part-time, and then you have your guys on standby that have their license, basically your peace officer license sponsored, and you have to do some voluntary work, things like that, to maintain that sponsorship and stuff like that. And you're basically waiting for a moment to get on to a police department, whether it's the school or a county or one of the other places. And so what ended up happening was they replaced Bryan Kohberger's position. They didn't replace the full-time or the head security officer. They only replaced his part-time, and they filled it in with somebody from behind him, which is common. And so when you go through the actual minutes from the board meeting, you discover that Bryan Kohberger's resignation was completely different than the 15 or the 14 others who were being resigned because of tax cuts and things of that nature. But go check it out. I have it all broken down. I have the minutes pulled up. We went through it. We looked through, item number 9E, G, whole 9 yards. Go check it out.
So I have to take a look at that myself. I haven't got to see a lot of your content, Daniel, and I typically try to watch as much of everybody as I can, at least little bits, to get some feel for it, and get their thoughts. And it opens my mind to be able to think outside the box. So I'll definitely take a look at that. So in your opinion, did he resign before getting in trouble, or did he get in trouble and they resigned him?
It sounds like they gave him the option to resign or be terminated. I don't know why or what, but apparently he left the law enforcement program in high school and was put in the HVAC group class, and who knows why, but there's some speculation there that in the HVAC class there was no females. Now, if there was an issue or whatever the case may have been, people ask, well, then why would they hire him back later? Well, I think his family works, or his parents work for the school district. I think his father's a janitor there, and I think they did him a solid in hiring him. And I think it's possible if that was the case, they probably did him a solid in firing him too, and said, hey, we know your dad, blah, blah, blah. And so I can see that being the issue there. As far as why they did it, I don't know. I've just only seen the resignation letter. I've heard some rumors, but I've heard a lot of different things. I've heard about allegations coming out of Northampton University There was the security guard stuff. There was the WSU stuff that was going on, not just with students, but also with professors, which is well documented as well. And the one thing that a lot of people are saying that have said was that that people have said that they had seen Bryan Kohberger around with a female of Asian descent. And one of the PhD students, if you look at her name, it appears to be an Asian descendant name as well. And from the sounds of it, it appeared that he had come a little too close and made somebody a little bit too uncomfortable, another PhD student. So I think we can all kind of connect some dots there of who that person is. Well, that person was in fear. So I know a lot of people will look and say, hey, you know, that Bryan Kohberger had supposedly an Asian girlfriend, or there was an Asian girl that he had been seen. Well, it doesn't sound like it ended well with that relationship, whatever relationship it may have been. I don't think it was a romantic one, but you know, whatever that may have been.
At the end of, you know, just my thought process in regards to that, and that's all important information. I just hope that if that's something that's going to really be tied to Bryan Kohberger, people have the ability to step in that courtroom and utilize their voice and look people dead in the eye and tell the story and tell their truths, so that those out here, like many of us that hear these, I've heard these things too, and I just don't find them as pure fact or pure fiction, because I don't know what's going on. I wasn't there. I didn't see it.
Right.
I need to see that person step up. If they're going to make a claim, step up to the plate and do it. And I know we don't have that amount of time in a courtroom, in a trial, to hear everybody's words come in, to, you know.
I'm sure we'll hear these. I'm sure
But
we'll
I want to hear, you know, I want people to be transparent, use your voice. Don't put it out in the press. Don't put it, and I'm not saying they did. I'm not saying they did. But come out and state it. Then we can better understand it. And then people like me that have an open mind that want to hear it, then I can make that determination of how valid I think that is. Because, I mean, I get the whole, he was an odd individual. He talked oddly to women. I've done it in my life. Trust me, I've had one too many beers at the bar. And oh boy, that conversation should have never happened. You know what I mean? It happens sometimes. And some people portray something one way when it's something completely different. So I just want to hear it from the source. That's it.
Right.
And I'm not saying your work isn't incredible, because I know you put time into it. Right. I've got to see it firsthand from that source for me to make any type of classification.
Right. No, and I understand that 100%. It's just, you know, it's not just one person though. I mean, this is over and over and over again.
Yeah,
different colleges, different situations. I mean, at a certain point, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I understand a one-off, you know, maybe perhaps the person at the restaurant that made accusations about, you know, some of the things he was saying and whatever the case may have been. Okay, maybe one situation or this situation, but multiple ones, it kind of adds up. Sirius Black, I'm gonna scroll off a couple of these. Sirius Black says, because it's $5, says, great conversation, great company, always a good time at the Drunk Turkey Show. Thank you so much. If they can prove BK only wore rubber gloves everywhere starting after the crime, would look very suspect in my opinion. I agree, and I think that's going to be a huge component to certain people's testimony. Regina comes in saying, Pullman burger chain takes last orders at 2:45 a.m. But you can schedule an order up to 4, between 4 and 5 they close. What time did BK turn off his phone? I think they turned it off like at 2:50 something. But if he used his phone to call or was any part of the DoorDash order, I feel that electronical transaction and location and everything else that would go along with it would have gotten him caught fairly quickly. Steelers fan comes in with a 1 gifted Drunk Turkey Show membership. Mikey S comes in with a being a member for 14 months. What's going on, Mikey? Good to see you. Good to see you. He's also gifted another turkey membership, and we have a new member, Pow Sunshine. Thank you all for joining and sticking tuned and staying tuned with us. When it comes to this crime, there, AR, whoever committed this crime, they went in there and they took the lives of 4 people. If not Bryan Kohberger, whoever did this is still out there You know, would you
which is
agree that they would
scarier.
take, right? Would you agree that it would take a certain amount of callousness to commit this crime?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been around these people, Daniel, and they're unreal. They're
Mhm.
unreal type of people. Like it makes you sick to your stomach at how callous they are, emotionless they are. They don't care about anything. Nothing. Nothing.
Right. No, I
Nothing.
agree. I agree. What about remorse? You think there'd be an issue with remorse?
And you know what? People, for the majority of my life, and I never did anything to this level of things, but I was involved in some violent stuff inside of the penitentiary itself. And sometimes you have to set aside the remorse. You know, normal people sometimes have to overcome the remorse until they have time to actually endure and dive into it. And it took me a long time. Like I didn't care. I just went out and did it again, you know. And if I
Yeah.
lied, I lied again. And if I stole again. There wasn't remorse. And I believe that the person that dove into a crime very much like this, there's no looking back. They don't care. They moved forward. They're not sorry for what they did. They're not looking
Mhm.
over their shoulder feeling bad for the victims' families. They're not looking at the community and the the devastation they did within the community. They're not even worried about the victims that they took off the earth, of whether it was even worthy to do that. They don't care. They don't.
No, I agree. I agree. So, isn't it like another piece of the puzzle when we find out that Bryan Kohberger has put out there in writing that he struggles with remorse and those type of things, and feeling guilt or having little to no feeling for anybody? I mean, I think that adds to this puzzle piece as well. I mean, you have the reports, you have the history, you have now you don't have a criminal history, but you have a history of documented allegations against him of disturbing behaviors.
I mean,
You have the
I
lack of
guess
remorse,
the
the
only way
DNA.
the only way I can really answer your question, Daniel, is kind of refer to myself because I had a lot of the same stuff when I was young, due to my background and the way I
Mhm.
was raised, foster care. I had kind of a rougher upbringing. So I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of emotional writing onto the paper and trying to express myself. And it came across negative. It came across hateful. It came across emotionless. It came across like people were like, oh my God, what's wrong with this kid? I was in counseling, all this stuff. I mean, but as things got a little bit better and I was able to get a little more grasp on things, and I can't refer this to Bryan because I don't know Bryan. I don't know. I don't know if
Mhm.
he clicked into place and started to overcome, and that's why he proceeded to go into the PhD and pursue a career and try to better himself. But there are signs. I get what you're saying. I kind of knew this would be a focal point of what we could talk about is the past signs that led to where he could possibly be right now here today. And
Mhm.
I see him. I see him. I see the anger issues. I see the emotionless. I see it all. But could something have clicked that we don't know yet? And we have to wait and see if something like that gets presented. If something like that doesn't get presented, boy, it's going to be hard to overcome a very cold look that people are going to showcase. And you've got to try to prove that you're not that cold, unremorseful, emotionless beast.
Mhm.
It's gonna be hard to do because I had to fight to do that. I know it's hard. So
Mhm.
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Uh, y- you said you spent some time in. Did you meet or know anybody who went into prison who were on drugs?
Oh yeah.
Now, those that were addicted to drugs, was there any type of change in their appearance or personality throughout prison, not being um, having availability to those drugs?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I know right where you go. And they gain weight, they gain color within their skin tones, they get healthier, they get quicker minded, they get clearer minded. Man, I've seen the addicts like you're talking about. Let me tell you, they're sloppy, they're sleepy. I mean, it's their lives change for the better when they get off of the mess and they get
Right.
away.
So when you look at Bryan Kohberger from the moment that he was arrested to now, he's gotten heavier. They're obliging by his diet. He specifically stated in his last hearing, or his defense did, that his hiking and running, almost stopped already. He was doing longer drives, so it wasn't like he was doing 6-mile runs up until the point where he got arrested. And so there was a huge change in his physical activity. So he was doing night drives. Drives is recalling, that's he's sitting down, not doing much. He's gained some weight. He looks like his face was sunk in a little bit. What do you think about that? Does that remind you of anybody that may have gotten in there with a problem beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it so much. Daniel, if I ever wanted to step up here and deny that, it would be like I would have to boldly lie to you straight eye to eye. Of course, I mean, you see the change, and it's not right. I mean, you see it almost immediately because they get away from that, they get over the sickness, and now they start to get healthier.
Mhm.
So, I get what you're saying, the lack of exercise, the change in the exercise routine. There's a lot that can be said, and that's why I always fall back on, I just want to see the presentation. I see the change in health, but I see the same demeanor. I see the same look in the face. I see the same walk. I see the same carrying of himself. So I'm not sure personality changed, but I can definitely see a health change for sure.
I think there is a little bit. I mean, he looked like he was very cold staring. I mean, he definitely probably scared out of his ass when they arrested him. So, I mean, that could have been the reason why he had
There's no doubt in my
such a
mind.
blank look. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So,
Being extradited across the country and everything he had to go through, because I've been there. Yeah, you change your drawers a couple extra times a day, and it puts you into a shock phase. It really does.
now, if we go back and we look at and we think about what Bryan Kohberger that we know of that he claims to have done, we know that at 2:40 something he's out and about, and on Saturday morning. I don't know if he went to sleep right before then and just woke up, but if he hadn't and he'd been up since the morning, he'd been up all that morning, all that day, up at 2:40. He's driving around by his own admission until 5 something in the morning, and then we know that he leaves again at 9, goes to Moscow, then comes back, and then he goes to Clarkson, and then doesn't get back home again until about 8:30 that evening. That's a lot to do, even if you don't commit a quadruple homicide. I find that difficult for somebody to be able to maintain consciousness, especially out there in the middle of nowhere in Idaho with your phone off, or without it
I was
connected
going
to
to ask you
anything.
too, but what I will think would be very interesting to see, and I hope they have it, is the footage from Albertsons. I think it will
Mhm.
be very telling. I think it will be very telling because that's after the crime, still early enough in the morning. You haven't had time to adjust, collect yourself. I mean, maybe you've collected yourself and calmed down a little bit, but your heart's still beating. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, what the hell was he getting at Albertsons? Did they ever say? Did anybody ever
I have no
make a
idea.
mention?
No, I don't. Don comes in with a $10 super sticker, and so did Lisa Wilson. Thank you guys. We appreciate you. I don't know what they bought there or what he purchased there. I do know that, though, there's been speculation that that's around the time that he started wearing the gloves. There's been speculation that his sisters thought that was pretty odd of him as well, and thought that that was something who led to them searching his car. Now, I think that it is pretty odd that he's wearing gloves, after the murders. And one of the things that I find funny is, like, some folks they told me, like, hey, why do you think he's wearing gloves? And I'm like, well, he's wearing gloves so that he doesn't, or doing this stuff with the trash and the DNA. He's trying to hide his DNA from law enforcement in a house of people that share his DNA. I thought that was hilarious, to be honest with you. But then, I'll get questioned, like, Bryan Kohberger, if he did this, he would have made so many dumb mistakes. He drove his own car, turned on his phone, left his DNA, left the sheath behind. And my rebuttal is always like, and you're surprised he got caught? Why? If he made so many mistakes? If he took his phone and turned it on right afterwards, and it shows that he was just south of the murders, and he turned it off right before it, he left the sheath behind. DNA was on it. I mean, I don't understand that. But I'm not. Go ahead.
I get your point, Daniel, but I gotta just interject real quick because I know you got more to say. So I'll just make it real quick.
Yeah.
We know there's dumb criminals out there that do dumb things and they just don't make sense, and that's why they get caught. But if that's the case, people need to really pump the brake and stop saying he's so smart, he could do this and this and this, but he's so dumb he did that, that, and that. I mean, it's a really hard argument to have to say, well, he's so dumb, he started wearing gloves after the crime. Now, in my mind, I wear gloves, but I've worn them since I was like 12.
Right.
So people don't see it as unusual that I have my gloves on because I've done it since I was 12.
Right.
So it's normal. If people that know Bryan Kohberger can come to the plate and say, I've known him for 28 years and he never wore gloves at the grocery store, so I have no idea why the hell he started today.
Yeah.
That's a different story. That's a different story, you know? So
and
that's something I just need people to step up. If the sisters had those feelings about Bryan Kohberger, they will be at trial and have to testify to that.
Yeah, I've heard they're going to testify to a few things, but when it comes to what we're just saying right now, the shoot, what is it? I'm losing it. It's gotten late for me.
I know it is getting late your time, so we'll wrap it up quick so you can get some sleep.
Yeah. Gosh, man, I had a pretty dang awesome point there, and I kind of slipped on it. I just think that when it comes to when it comes to Bryan Kohberger, repeat that first part that you said, because I had a point with it, and I completely forgot where it was going with it. The first part of what you were.
And now you want me to save us by me remembering.
Yes.
I see how this is. We were talking about the dumb criminal.
Right. Oh, there you go. Thank you. So that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. I understand that Bryan Kohberger is intelligent and that he made a lot of things, that a lot of people question, if he was so intelligent, how can he make these dumb mistakes? I think it's important to determine when these mistakes were made. If we look at the Linda Lane footage, which I'm not talking about the audio, I'm just talking about what you see. You see a vehicle go in there and drive around there a few different times. Now, after 4 o'clock, after the DoorDasher has left, is when we start seeing this vehicle start acting kind of odd. It starts to, at first, it parks there in front of the 507 Queen apartment, and it stays there for about 12 seconds, and then it does this weird backup, and then it turns around, then it goes in front of the house again. And when it gets there, according to the PCA, whoever's operating that vehicle either appears to try to park unsuccessfully or turn around unsuccessfully. Then they go and do another 3-point turn, then come back all the way around. So you can already see, for whoever's operating that vehicle, like, things are getting real. The mistakes that Bryan Kohberger made were being made during the time of the commission of the crime, not during the planning of the crime, not post-crime. Those are things that are significantly less stressful. The commission of the crime is when all hell's breaking loose. That's when you leave the knife sheath. That's when, him leaving. When he went to Pennsylvania, the police officers there said that, it sounded like he waived his extradition rights so quickly because he wanted to get to Idaho. And the law there was that you can't see the probable cause affidavit until they present it to you in person in Idaho. So he couldn't see what they had on him, and he was eager to see what they had on him. If somebody saw you inside of that house and you left, and you have some sort of device, let's just say a walkie-talkie type app that you can listen to police radio, you're going to get far enough that you're not going to be investigated by, then turn on your whatever app to see if they're onto you. And I think that him going back the next morning at 9 o'clock is evident that he probably had something, because if let's just assume that he committed this crime. If he's going back at 9 o'clock, and the reason he's going back is because he's not seeing anything on the news, he's not hearing anything on the news about a quadruple homicide, it's not being reported yet. at any moment, those bodies could have been found. At any moment, 911 could have been called. So he could have been on his way. And while he's in route, somebody called 911, they would have established a perimeter and start documenting license plates coming in and out. So for me, I think that, and this is my thoughts, I think he had probably some sort of, app on his phone. I think Broadcastify was broadcasting the Moscow Police Department police dispatch at the time. And so if he was listening to that and he wanted to hear something, what's going on, nobody's called 911, I think that would make sense there. And so, but only time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole thing. Like, we can sit here, we can discuss all these thoughts and theories of, I think there's a snitch. I think that the way they got to Kohberger was people started talking, and obviously you work your way through the line of mouth and it gets to an end result. Many people get caught by the word of mouth. That's just what happens. And then the evidence comes to play after the fact.
Well, the only argument against that is, though, there's no point in doing an IGG if somebody talks. Like, all you have to do, if somebody says, hey, Bryan Kohberger committed this crime, you don't do an IGG. You go wait out at his apartment and see if you can find his DNA. And if he's wearing gloves and he's doing all these things and you can't get his DNA, let's just say you even see him there, you visually see him at the apartment, and you're trying to get his DNA, but he's outsmarted you. You can't get it. The next move law enforcement's going to do is go sit outside mom and dad's house, get dad's DNA, get a match that way, in a similar way that they did. And now they got a warrant to go pick him up and match him that way. So there would have been absolutely no purpose whatsoever to do an IGG. It's pointless at that point. So the only reason they do an IGG, and it states there in the state's documents that FBI only does it if there's no leads, if every law enforcement, has exhausted all of their tactical methods. Now, this is a policy of theirs. It's not a law. So I know some people say, well, maybe they started doing that beforehand. Maybe, but it doesn't mean it's illegal. It just means it's policy. And the reason why it's policy is because there's only one FBI and there's a crap ton of law enforcement agencies. And they probably want those law enforcement agencies to do their investigations before they're involved, because if not, then the FBI is going to be taking on a crap ton of crap and it's going to get out of control, snowball. So there's reasons behind the policy, reasons behind the madness, but it doesn't make it illegal or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean, I also see that the state of Idaho is pointing over to the FBI saying they helped us. They got some of this info. We're waiting on it. So we'll see, and it's always a big debate. And this is why arguments break out. This is why things happen and the drama. And I'm just glad you and I were able to get together, have a good conversation. I'd love to do it again. I know you're tired, and I'm sure my dogs want to get out and go for a walk too. But we'll do it again, man. And I appreciate you for having me on and having a legitimate, good conversation.
I appreciate you coming on, my man. It was a great conversation. It's good to not argue too much. When the Regina comes in with $5 super chat, says 90% of people in jail were there because of drugs. My friends came back to visit me. My 6X grade jumper, you never look better at 1 week clean.
I would have to say a high percentage of people in the penitentiary are there for either drug charges or something that they did while on drugs. And then the drug problem within the penitentiary is even worse. So hopefully we can find a solution.
100%, guys. Well, we're going to be calling this a show. Guys, make sure you go and check out Convicts Thoughts with A.R. Hayes. I have it linked in the description. You can just click there, and that'll take you to his channel. Make sure you let him know that the Drunk Turkey Show sent you. I'd love to have you back on again. Just to even just bounce off ideas and stuff. I think that it's very constructive and things of that nature. On Friday, I'm going to have Swamp Rose on the panel as well. So look out for that. Monday, it's probably going to be a little bit later. Schedules are going to probably be changing a little bit just because my work has got a new project that we're going to be taking on. And I'm going to have to be working a little bit later on Mondays. So this is kind of the reason why Mondays have been a hit and miss here recently. But Monday, I'm going to be back. It's going to be a little bit later. I'm going to have Jeff H on. We're going to be going back into the Linda Lane footage and breaking down what we see. You don't want to miss it. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, ring that notification bell. Thank you again, AR. I appreciate you so much for joining us. And I look forward to maybe joining your panel next time.
Yeah, we'll do something again here soon, man. I appreciate you very much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Y'all have a great night. Peace out, y'all.